Thank you very much for the warm introduction. I'd like to, on behalf of Ben Gurion University of the Negev, I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual conference. You know, past 6 years, we've had this past 6 times at the university, at our Sde Boker campus. But maybe actually the fact that we have to have this conference virtually is an advantage for us this year. The fact that there are, I think, over 900 people with us right now from over 60 countries. I'm not sure that all of you would have had the opportunity or the option of coming to be with us on campus right now. So in this very important time of COVID-19, of the pandemic, but with that we know that within a year or two with the inoculations, the pandemic will come to an end. It is clear that the biggest problem in the world, and it will be one day after the pandemic ends, is global climate change, desertification, and all the effects that this has on our society. So I'm incredibly thankful to the organizers of this meeting, all of the speakers from around the world who are joining us, all of you, the participants, and our sponsors who really saw the importance of this meeting. And mostly, I'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting for giving me an opportunity to take a step outside of my role as president, to remove the president's hat. Actually, if I can for a second, maybe even remove the president's tie. And go back to my earlier life, not so long ago, as an academic who one of my fields of interest was food security. And I'd like to share with you over the next 20 minutes, the last report, the last project I was involved in. This was, it's a report that came out of the Association of Academies and Societies of Sciences in Asia, AASSA, which led a major collaborative study on food security in Asia and the Pacific. And this was took us about 2.5 years to come up with this report. So what was special, or what defined our approach? So what was different about our approach was, first of all, we had leading scientists from the academies across the region. And it's one of the largest regions, or if not the largest region in the world. And they were drawn from a wide geographic area and across different scientific disciplines. We had economists and plant biologists and agricultural experts and public health experts, nutritionists, even people involved in political science. All these disciplines coming together to study food security in the Asia Pacific area. We used a bottom-up analysis using a food systems approach to develop common themes to study food security. And once we wrote the report went first through peer review and then was signed off by all 34 science academies in Asia and the Pacific. So the report was both cooperative and authoritative. And what was our challenge? Our challenge was how to ensure food security in the Asia Pacific region over the next 20 to 30 years, this massive region on our globe, massive and diverse region. But before we go into our findings, let's go into see what was the definition of food security that we adopted. As you know, many people use the word food security as a tag item, as a buzzword, and we adopted the definition from the World Food Summit, which says that food security exists when all people at all times have the physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets the dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. In other words, it's important to remember that food security is not a question only of calories. Food security is a question of where you're getting the calories from and how it makes you feel. In different parts of the world, we are happy eating different foods. So first, we defined our challenges, and you could probably define these with me. The first, of course, is population growth. We're quickly approaching 10 billion people in the world, more than 3 times the day I was born. And much of this growth is happening in Asia. But interestingly, the growth within Asia is variable. Countries such as India and Indonesia will experience still large growth in populations, whereas countries such as Japan and China are actually going to have negative growth. The second challenge is we have an expanding middle class throughout Asia. And why is this a challenge? Because as the middle class grows, of course, this slows down population growth. But the food desires of the middle class is different from that of a poverty class. The food needs of a middle class are different. And the middle class also becomes a very consumer-based society, which then affects how agriculture is done, which affects waste, which affects pollution, affects all the issues of food and nutritional security. So that needs to be taken into account also, the expanding middle class and the changing in food preferences. The third challenge is a challenge of urbanization. And this is a picture from the town I live in, Hod HaSharon in Israel. This is a neighborhood which until a few decades ago was full of orange orchards and strawberry fields. But now you see it's a neighborhoods within the town. The town has increased from 10,000 people to over 50,000 people. And all over the world, we see this happening, that arable land is decreasing. Arable land is decreasing even at a rate of over 100 square kilometers per year. What this means is that while today, a little bit less than 24% of the Earth's surface is arable, it's predicted that by 2050, in only 30 years, this will reduce to only 20% of the Earth's surface. The fourth challenge is the loss of yield gains. While population has been growing dramatically over the past century, today in the world, there's proportionally less hunger than at any time in human history. And the reason is that for the past 100 years, each year, the yield per acre, the yield per hectare of corn, of rice, of soybeans has gone up, such that we're producing more food on less land. But over the past decade or so, we've noticed a trend that for many crops, these gains in yield are seeming to level off, that we might be reaching some type of biological limit or biological limit that we know of right now to how much yield we can increase per plant. And whatever we're going to do, we're going to have to deal with a rapidly changing climate, whether it's through desertification or through droughts, huge periods of heat, massive rainfalls, winds. This is going to affect the way we're going to be able to grow our food. And this is not anything new. This has been obvious for decades. In this graph, we see yields of corn in the United States. And every time there was a major environmental event, yields went down, whether it be drought or whether it be flooding. And this is just going to increase in the coming years. Now, if I go back to the good news, is that we've been able to feed the world rather well recently. But unfortunately, challenge number 6 is that modern agriculture is not sustainable. Wherever we look, modern agriculture has left its scars on the earth that will affect our ability to grow food in the future. Whether it be the fertilizer runoff in the Gulf of Mexico, which is leading to this large dead zone, whether it to be cutting down of the Amazon for soy fields and other fields, whether it be desertification, loss of biodiversity, the overuse of pesticides, wherever we look, we can see the scars inflicted by modern agriculture. So while of course producing food and solving hunger is critical, we're going to have to find new ways of doing this. So what are the overall implications of this? First of all, the world will need to produce 70% more food by the middle of this century. But not just more food, we'll have to produce healthier foods. This is both a consumer demand and a need in society that our food become more healthy. So we're looking not only at food security, but also nutritional security. And we're going to have to do this with less land. We're going to have to do this with less water. And we're going to have to do this with fewer phosphates. We sometimes forget that phosphate fertilizers are a non-renewable resource. And whatever we do, we have to consider the impact of climate change. So what were the key findings of our report? And I won't go through the entire report in the time here, just some of the key findings. First of all, we have to deal with both under and overnutrition. These are the challenges of a modern world. There are as many people who are now considered obese, actually even more than undernourished. Food and nutrition security is much more than simple calorie provision, as I've said. And because of this, we call on all countries, actually regions, to define a healthy diet that's appropriate both regionally or locally. You know, everyone talks about, or a lot of people talk about the Mediterranean diet. We're lucky that in Israel, that if everyone would adopt the Mediterranean diet, we would all be much healthier. But the Mediterranean diet is not culturally proper for other parts in the world. So each part of the world needs to define a diet which would both provide nutritional security, health security, and is appropriate. We need to take into account food wastage. It's as important as food production, because if we reduce waste, then we don't have to produce as much food. Most importantly, whatever strategy we come up with, it must be evidence-based. Within this, we came up with 31 key recommendations, but I first want to talk about what I think is the most important one. That science and technology, and that's the purpose of this conference, must take center stage. We have to recognize and accept and publicize that science and technology is the engine of long-term change in food security. But the problem, there's a great lag. So in this graph, we see money invested in science and technology, and what's the economic return of the research benefits. But there is a decades-long lag between investment and return. This is what science is all about. The basic science research leading to the applied research, which is then finally taken over by industry. We've seen this over the past century in agriculture, whether it be in the adoption of hybrid crops, the adoption of irrigation, or even the rather rapid adoption of transgenic biotech crop technologies. So there needs a long-term investment to reap benefit. And historically, this investment has been done by governments because it's such a long-term investment. But the problem is that modern democracy, modern politics doesn't always have a long-term view. And if we look at several countries throughout Asia, I can use China first as an example. Look at what's going on here in China. Every year over the past quarter of a century, there's been an increase in investment in research and development, and this is all standardized per percentage of the GDP. Even as the GDP in China went up, they've increased spending in research and development. The same thing with South Korea. It's been amazing how South Korea has invested in research and development. In the recent decade, Thailand has started going on with that also. But if you look at other countries, the situation is not as optimistic. India, with all of its wonderful growth, has remained basically flatlined in its research and development spending as a percentage of GDP. Israel, our own country here, where we're having the conference, at the turn of the century had a massive increase. But since then, we've been flatlined. And what does that mean, actually? That means we're going backwards because there's been inflation over this time. And so if we don't, countries that don't invest in research and development today will not have the capabilities in 1 or 2 decades to meet the challenges that will face us. And this is essential from a historical perspective. You know, food security is nothing new. We can look at it both as an ancient and modern phenomenon. From where I'm speaking now, 3,500 years ago, according to the Bible, Abraham took his family and his followers out of the land of Israel, down through the desert, through Beersheba, and across into Egypt. And why did he leave? According to the Bible, I think the sentence is, and there was a great famine in the land. And so they had to leave to look for food. Even today, this continues. The march of people from the Middle East and from Africa into Europe is less of a desire for democracy than it is a desire to know that they have the financial capability to feed their children. People who have food and nutritional security do not often leave from where they live. And even in stable countries like Israel, food insecurity can lead to social unrest. The Israelis here will remember this 10 years ago, 9 years ago. This is a demonstration in the center of Tel Aviv. This is me here where the blue line is. And this demonstration, 500,000 people, was because of a 70% increase in the cost of cottage cheese. We love cottage cheese in Israel. It's part of our staple diet. And a rise in the price of cottage cheese brought 500,000 people to demonstrate, almost brought down the government, and actually caused a change at that time in the prices. So it behooves all of us in all societies, whether rich or poor, to make sure that there is food security throughout the entire country. So with all of these challenges, I have to say I'm an optimist. And the reason I'm an optimist is because of India. When I was a child, the famines in India, in Rajasthan and in Bihar, were so severe that if it wasn't for foreign aid, who knows how many tens of millions of people would have died. At that time in India, I believe there were about 400 million people in the country. If someone would have told us then in the 1960s that India of 2020 would be a net food exporter, no one would have believed it. That's not to say that there's not food and nutritional insecurity in India today, but it's less agronomic than it is economic. So technology, the adoption of technology, the adoption of green revolution technologies can allow us to provide the nutritional needs we have for the world. I'm convinced of that. So what were the bottom line messages? First of all, there needs to be public dissemination of factual science-based information regarding food and nutritional security, and in particular, the role of agricultural biotechnology in providing safe and sustainable, healthy diets. If people aren't willing to accept technology, we are often to blame for it that we haven't communicated properly. Second, we need to have cross-nation, interdisciplinary centers of research and educational excellence in Asia, the best of the best. They need to be formed now to focus on defined issues. You know, sort of like in Europe, they managed to have international research centers. We should have them also in Asia. And so for this, we need a transnational funding mechanism to establish something similar to in Europe to fund this essential research for the future of our planet and to reinvigorate agri-food research, to actually market agri-food research as high tech. And so what's the concluding quote? Increasing pressures from population growth, urbanization, land availability, resource and water availability, pollution, global climate change, and loss of biodiversity conspire to make food and nutrition security a formidable near-term challenge. Science offers solutions, but plans need to be made now and enacted boldly and decisively if catastrophe and great suffering are to be avoided. I want to go through this and put a highlight on a few words: population growth, urbanization, land availability, resource and water availability, and global climate change. Maybe that is really the challenge of this conference: how to combat desertification, but at the same time use the desert as land to provide us the nutrition that we need. It's because of this, I want to talk a few minutes about Ben-Gurion University, about what's going on. It's because of this, I want to talk about what have we learned from 50 years of study in the desert. We've learned that what we once considered local problems are now global. This is what we're all doing here today. That real breakthroughs need multidisciplinary chutzpah. And chutzpah is a Yiddish, now Hebrew word, which defies definition, but basically means nerve. You need chutzpah to think that you can do agriculture in the middle of the desert. You need chutzpah to think that you can export tomatoes from the desert to Europe. We have extensive experience, but also translating this research to industry and in international development. And finally, there are no simple answers. These are complex issues we're working with. And so partnerships, interdisciplinary and international partnerships are essential. And considering all this, and because of this, we are now forming at Ben-Gurion University the School of Climate Change Impacts. We've spent 5 decades learning how to thrive in the desert through problem-based research. We've tackled the challenges of water scarcity and food security, developed advanced energy and cooling technologies, and studied the effects of a hot environment on human health. The urgent issues raised by rapid climate change, which you are dealing with in this conference, require informed action today. We have a responsibility, all of us do, to educate the next generation of leaders, both in research and in society, to tackle this challenge. And through our research, develop viable and implementable options to ensure a habitable future and well-being for everyone. This was actually the main conclusion of the report. So this school, the School of Science of Climate Change Impacts, will try to disseminate this around the world. We're now poised to share this experience. We have it right here in Beersheba, in Sde Boker. We have a supradisciplinary group of over 150, well, I consider, and I think you will consider also, outstanding scientists. And we want it to be a center for transdisciplinary academic teaching and research on the critical issues of climate change and sustainability. But at the same time, we have to recognize that climate change is not simply a physical problem, but rather one raising a host of societal problems. And we're going to take a transdisciplinary approach, engage throughout the school to leverage resources, to equip global leaders of today and tomorrow with the ability to apply their skills and knowledge in any area, to find real solutions to real-world problems as we have been doing already. And I invite you to partner with us, because without your partnership, we're just going to be working with ourselves here in one university. We all have to work together to find these solutions for real-world problems. And technologies such as Zoom enable us to share students, to share classes, to have research groups working together in a daily manner to find solutions for desertification, water purification, water usage, energy, all the things that you're going to be talking about in this conference. And in the end, we have to remind ourselves, why are we doing this? And I want to quote, I think I just drew a blank on his name, it'll come to me in a second, who said that combating hunger is not a question of charity. It's a question of human rights. No person, no mother should ever have to go to bed worrying about where her children are going to find their next meal. This is an issue of humanity. And that's why we do what we do. And that's why you are here at this conference. Thank you very much for allowing me to present this. I'll be happy to answer any questions if that's what's allowed right now. And I'll go back to the organizers. Thank you very much.